everyone, it's Thomas here, and we're back with the high-tech planet build, and I think it's time we get some plants in there. But I gotta tell you, this is gonna be a two-parter because we're gonna try something a little bit different in the spirit of doing things completely different from the low-tech series. We're gonna be using the dry start method for some carpeting plants, which means carpeting plants going first, and those other purple and red plants that I haven't decided on yet will be after. They'll come in another episode, a little bit later. But dry start method. So what is the dry start method? Sounds a little funny. Dry start, wet aquarium. You'd think they don't go together, but they do. So what the dry start method is, in essence, is a way of getting plants to become established and grow in lushly before you actually fill the aquarium. And this has some benefits. So number one, you can use less plants to start off because you're going to give them a really good shot at growing in relatively quickly before you even pour water in the tank. So that could save you some money. That's a nice little benefit. Benefit number two, you can grow all those plants without using any of the CO2 that you're planning to use on the aquarium later, because atmospheric CO2 in the room, in the home, is what's going to be feeding those plants to start off. That's always nice. Number three, you're not going to get algae on those plants because there's no water in there. So the plants can get nice and established, grow in without any worries of you having algae problems during that time. It also means that you won't have to fiddle around with the CO2 trying to get the level just right as the plants grow in, because as the plants grow, the demand for CO2 goes up and you're going to have to fiddle with it, and you can get some algae problems just from that as well. So yeah, you're avoiding all that kind of mess. So it sounds pretty good, right? It's also easier to plant in that substrate because the plants won't try to float away in the water with their buoyancy as you're trying to get them to stay down. And when you're dealing with small rooting carpeting plants like I'm going to be using for this setup, that can be a huge pain and I don't want to deal with it, so dry start method. So it's really important to note that not all plants will work with the dry start method. They have to be plants that can grow immersed, meaning out of water or even partially in water. If you try to grow plants that need to be fully submersed at all times, they will perish. They won't survive. They won't do well. They will... So what plants are suitable, especially talking carpeting plants, since that's what I'm doing in there? I've got a list that I have either used in the past or have known people who have used in the past and have turned out really well, although the list is technically longer than what I'm about to give you. I'm going to give you the ones that I've, this is Thomas approved. Number one, what I'm going to be using in this system, which is dwarf baby tears, beautiful little small round-leafed plant, gorgeous little carpet. You can also use dwarf hairgrass. It works pretty well. Glossostigma. There's also Monte Carlo. People like to use Monte Carlo. You can also use what I used in the low-tech, which is Styrogene repens. There's also Taxiphyllum and Vesicularia mosses. Those would be your Java moss and or Christmas moss species. Lots of fun. Lastly, there's Pogostamen helferi, which is a really cool looking plant. Not exactly your traditional carpet, but you can grow it in the same way, and it looks pretty rad. So one of the first things you're going to want to make sure you have for the dry start method is a nutrient-rich substrate. I'm going to be using one that is the Tropica. It is great. Other substrates you can use are things like Fluvalstratum. I've even used Carob C's Eco Complete, and it's worked pretty well. You want to try to avoid using any kind of inert substrate. Otherwise, you're going to have to basically be adding nutrients to the tank for the plants every time you mist, which you will be doing. I'll talk more about that later. You can often just mix a little bit of nutrients into the water that you're going to be misting, although I find if you just use the right substrate to start off with, it is way easier. It is easy mode. It is like pushing the easy button. Next, you're going to want to make sure your hardscape is already finished in the tank, which mine is. So whatever you're going to be putting in, whether it's driftwood or rock or stone or ornaments or whatever it is, get that all in there first. That way, once you've got everything planted, it can grow in around that rather than you just growing a gigantic carpet and then trying to plop stuff in there later and having to mess it up. Hardscape first. Next, you're going to want a full cover for the aquarium, whether it's a glass top or a complete plastic cover. What I'm going to have to use, because mine's rimless, and you could also use if you're using a rimless tank, which is a plastic cling wrap. You need a way to basically cover the tank that will still allow light through from your light fixture, that will give you the ability to retain the humidity inside of the aquarium. That's a really important part of this. You want to make sure there's high humidity, so there's always enough moisture for the plants while they're growing. You don't want them to dry out. It's hard to grow when you're dried out and dead. You're also going to need a light fixture, obviously. You're going to want to use whatever fixture you're intending to use on the tank for the duration of the tank's existence. The reason you want to do that is because whatever light you're growing these plants under during the dry start method, they'll already be accustomed to it and doing well under it. So swapping that out for something else is just a recipe for not necessarily disaster, but potential problems. So it's best to just use the fixture you're intending to use. When you add the water to the tank, there will be a very minute drop in par, depending on how tall the tank is. Mine's not very tall, so I'm not expecting a whole lot. But that's the only thing the plants are going to have to adjust to, essentially. So it's best to just stick the light on that you intend to use that light. Plants will be ready to go, growing under it. They'll know it. They'll have a rapport. They'll continue to have that rapport with the light fixture after you fill the tank. So everything should be good. Rapport. It's a good word. And lastly, you're going to need a misting bottle. I like to use either a reptile mister that you can kind of pump up, and it gives a nice fine mist. You can adjust it so it's nice and fine. The misting bottle is obviously for misting the plants. You're going to want to do that essentially daily to, one, make sure the plants always have a nice coating of moisture on the leaves so that they don't dry out. It also makes sure that the humidity in the aquarium stays nice and high. And lastly, by misting every day, you have to peel open the lid, whether it's a glass top that you're opening or a plastic top, or in my case, the plastic cling wrap. That's going to allow extra fresh air from the room into the tank, bringing along any CO2 that's in the room into the tank for those plants. It also makes sure that you don't end up with stagnant air in there, which can have its own repercussions, which we don't want because they're bad. Now, there are things you don't need right away, like your filter or the CO2 system or a heater. All of that stuff you can put on the tank after, and you've probably noticed already by looking at the tank behind me, I've actually taken all that stuff off for now, and the reason I did that is because I have to cling wrap the top of the tank, and it'd be a lot easier to do that without extra things in the way to have to cling wrap around. Now I only have to cling wrap around the light. It's going to be easier. So it usually takes 4 to 8 weeks for everything to grow in and the carpet to look lush and ready to go, at which point you get the filter on there, get the heater on there, flood the tank and fill it with water, turn everything on, get it running, turn on the CO2 system. But I'm a ways out from there, so I will get back to you on how to do all of that stuff properly when this beauty is ready to go. It's still pretty empty. Dry start method is starting now, so we gotta wait. Gotta wait. So like I mentioned, for this tank, I'm going to be going with the all-so-lovely carpeting plant known as dwarf baby tears. That's them. I got 5 pots. It's probably more than I need for this tank. I could probably start with 2 or 3 pots and spread it out a lot and wait longer, but I don't want you guys to have to wait any longer than necessary, and quite frankly, this has been taking a while, and I'd love to see this thing full of plants, so I started with 5. So I'm gonna have to divide these and get them all ready to plant, and then I'm gonna plant them, and you're gonna see me do it. But first I gotta divide these, which you can watch if you'd like. So before you start planting, you're going to want to make sure you soak down the substrate a little bit. I'm going to be using this lovely mister to basically just spritz everything down. You want the surface to be nice and damp. That way it makes it easier to plant. The plants go in, the substrate doesn't stick to the roots or anything, and it kind of holds everything in place. So now that I've got them all divided, and like I said, these are pretty big portions considering I'm dividing them to do the dry start method, but I got a lot of pots so that this would happen quickly. So that's why. I also have a pile here, and this is all very small strands, which I'm probably going to use in some of the crevices and such in the rocks there. So I will show you that as I go through it, but now I'm going to just start planting it in there with these lovely tools I got up here. I'm probably going to use these tongs right here, perhaps. Maybe the other ones as well, but I'm going to start with these guys. Here we go. So the next step is to fill the bottom of the aquarium with a little bit of water. It's just enough water so that it comes up just below the lowest point of the substrate. So for me, that's right down here at the front. I'm just going to be putting enough water that it's right underneath it. So here I go. So now that everything is sprayed down and moist, and we've got some water in the bottom of the substrate, it is time to cap the thing. And like I mentioned, this is rimless, so I can't put a glass top on it, and I can't put a plastic top on with a light already built in because my light is separate. So I'm using some plastic cling wrap. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the light, get the wrap on there, and then put the light back on. And when I do that, you'll notice I'm gonna make sure that there's some space around the legs of the light there for a little bit of airflow. So here we go. So again, it's really important to keep the relative humidity inside of the aquarium very high. And that is why, if you look in the corners here, I have left on the side of the fixture's legs just enough space for a little bit of airflow. I will be double checking just to make sure that I'm still getting a lot of condensation on the glass, which will tell me that it's nice and high. If I'm not, what I'll do is I'll just progressively just roll a little bit more back over top of the fixture there. I'm going to be opening it up daily, like I mentioned, to make sure that I can spray it down and some new air gets in there every time I open it. But that's it. Now it's just a whole lot of waiting, which has been the theme of this build. I am going to be putting the light on a timer to make sure that these plants get enough light every single day, very consistently. When you're doing a dry start method like this, especially because you don't have to worry about algae developing in the tank, you can go a little bit more generously on the photo period, meaning if you'd like to, you could go for a full 12 hours on, 12 hours off for the lighting, and that will only help speed up the growth and get that carpet to grow in faster. I wouldn't do any less than 8 hours a day. But I personally am going to be going right down the middle with 10 hours a day, and we'll see how well it goes. I mean, there's already a ton in there. Why bump it to 12? I'm going to go right in the middle, 10 hours a day with this guy. So that's it. Now it's a waiting game. On the next episode, we're going to be talking about the other plants that are going to go in. We'll be filling this thing full of water, getting everything started. It's going to be a lot of fun, but until then, I get to watch grass grow. Not literal grass, but hey, it works. If you have any questions at all, whether it's about the dry start method or anything aquatics related, drop that down in the comment section below. You can also reach out to us on the Facebooks. We have that. So yeah, if you've got it, talk to us. We also have Instagram, full of aquatic eye candy for you. Even I like to check that out once in a while, just see what we've posted. I don't do it, so it's new to me. And don't forget to subscribe. We've got all kinds of stuff going on. We've got this build that still needs to get wrapped up. We got some updates on the low-tech tank. We got the mega build going, and maybe one more build of somewhat of a mega variety. You don't want to miss it. Subscribe. I'm glowing now. But now I can keep on tanking while I blush. which you do need a tank. You have to have a tank. It doesn't work very well without a tank. I have a tank. You need a way to basically keep the humidity. Ha! It's not a word.